Hello, Lindsay Price here, resident playwright for Theater Folk. In your Facebook, in your face, Facebook. It's today, it's Wednesday afternoon. It's a beautiful fall day here in Southern Ontario, and I hope that wherever you are is a beautiful day. So today I'm talking about remembering lines, tips for remembering lines. We have got a number of plays that are monologue based. And that means so everybody is only speaking in monologue for the entire play. We have one called Mythologues, which is Greek myth monologues. Mythologues might be one of my favorite titles because it's one of those things that I wish I had come up with. Myths and monologues. Mythologues by Janice Harris. So it's got all your favorite Greek mythology characters. You have them, don't you? And each one has a monologue about their particular place in Greek mythology, such as Persephone going down to getting ready to go down to the underworld, and Arachne, who had the competition with Athena, and some that you might not know, who is, for example, like Kakaya, who is happiness, and the sirens. Chris! Hey, Chris Evans, how about you? Yes, you're talking about repeat with those lines. That's what I want to hear. If you have great tips that you use in your classroom, I'm going to give you tips that I've got here in just a couple seconds. But if you've got tips for memorizing, put them down below in the comments. Everybody wants to know, how do they get their kids to memorize their lines? Repeat. So, Mythologues. We also have two plays by Krista Bonart, one called Puzzle Pieces and another one called Have You Heard, where, again, characters are telling their stories just through monologue, which means so many lines, so many lines that they have to memorize. And lastly, I wanted to make sure I mentioned Alan Hainell's Stressed. And I thought those were good things to bring out, just because of this whole notion of memorizing your lines, and what are the parts where you have the most lines to memorize, but in monologues. Okay, again, we got Chris, he's like, say it out loud every time. I'm actually going to counter that one, Chris, because my number one tip for me, and this works specifically for me because this is how I learn, is I write my lines down. I write my lines down and say them in my head. And I think the thing that you need to figure out for yourself is what kind of learner you are. Are you somebody who needs to, you connect it orally so that you say it out loud, you repeat it out loud, you record your cue lines, and so that you hear the cue line and then you say your line out loud? Are you an action-orientated learner so that you connect your line with an action? So it's like, what am I doing when I say this line? Or what is so-and-so doing when I say this line? The only thing that's a little bit tricky about that is if you are very focused on connecting a line with an action, that if somebody doesn't do that action or somebody changes that action, it can, like, the synapses in your brain can kind of go, I don't know what my line is because the action wasn't done perfectly. But that's one. Is it a brain thing? And for me, it's a brain thing. I write, when I used to act, I always wrote out my lines, said them out loud, said them in my head sometimes, and that really helped me focus. But maybe that was my beginning to becoming a writer, because it was very much a connection between the lines in my head and the pen in my hand, and writing them out over and over and over and over again cemented it for me. But that is something that you're going to have to, how do you get your kids to memorize their lines? It's not all going to work the same way. You will find kids who just, this repeating them over and over again is not as effective as another method. So there are a bunch of methods out there in terms of, so the thing to do is to find out what kind of learner your kids are, and they're maybe gonna have to find that out for themselves. So is it something where it's written down? Is it something where it's oral and that they maybe record the lines and that they hear them? Or they have somebody, and you can do this in a partnership kind of a scenario where somebody says the cue line and they have to repeat their line. Or is it something that is associated with an action? The other things that you can do is to get students out of rote so that they are not just, here is my cue line, here is my line, or here is my line, here is my line, here is my line. You can do things that really scramble their brain and really get them to know what their lines are out of context, right? So that they know their lines because they haven't been just practicing them the same way every time. Hey, see you later, Chris. Have fun in class. Thanks for checking in. And so we're talking about lines. We're talking about memorizing lines. If you have tips for your best tip for memorizing lines with your students, or that you yourself have used, write them down in the comments. Everybody wants to know, how do we get students to memorize their lines? Sometimes it could be something where it is a fight or flight is not exactly the right way to respond to this, but we have a playwright, Stephen Stack, who works with students, and he will do a play in a week. And if he does it at his summer camp, it's a play in a day. So they get the play, and then it goes up, and it has to be done. Or if it's a play in a week, those lines have to be memorized. The play's being produced at the end of the week. It just has to happen, so that it's not 6 weeks to learn your lines. It's not 3 weeks to learn your lines. It's 3 days, right? That this is what happens, so that it's the momentum towards getting it done and getting on stage and having those lines memorized. I'm always amazed about what students can do. If you give students 4 months to memorize their lines, it will take them 4 months. If you give them a week to memorize their lines, the majority of them, they will have it done in that 1 week. So that's another thing. You can shorten the time frame that it takes to have you give students to memorize lines. You can take them out of context. Practice the scene backwards. What is the last line? Who has the last line? Who has the line before that? And the line before that? And the line before that, so that they're focused on not the way that it usually happens, but in a way that it'll never happen. Start a scene right in the middle. Pick a line out of a scene, and boom, everyone has to go into action and move forward from there. Practice the beginning and the end. Do first line scene drills. First lines of scene drills. So you have what is the first and the last line of every scene. Do exercises where you're calling out a line and everybody's in a circle, and who can say what the next line is. And that's something that actually builds towards another thing that I think is really important, is to see if you can move your cast away from being a cast of individual actors, but a community. Because if you have a cast where everyone is thinking as an individual, as in, here are my lines, here are the number of lines that I have, I'm going to memorize these lines, and that's it. That if someone goes up during a show, that's not them, what happens time and time again, and I've seen this so many times in school productions, where somebody goes up and everybody on stage just kind of looks around and goes, well, it's not my line. And I don't know what he has to say, he or she has to say, or I know, but I'm not going to, I don't know what to do. What on earth would I do? That if you are moving your students towards thinking as a community, then everybody's on the same page and everybody is working towards the same goal, which is not, I'm going to be good in this play, but we as a community are all going to do our best together. And if we're going to do our best together, then that means everybody is on point when something goes awry, because it always does, right? Someone forgets their line, someone jumps ahead 4 pages. What is the cast doing as a community to bring the play back to where it needs to be? And that means everybody sort of needs to be working together, doing exercises where lines are being pulled out of the middle of scenes and not in running order. So if you pick a line from scene 8, and the next time you pick a line from scene 3, so that everybody is sort of really honed in on what the lines are. The other thing that does is it gets everybody really focused, so that when something goes wrong, then that's it. People are in a mode to do it. So sometimes you have to practice. You have to practice things going awry in your rehearsal. Do a thing where you're going to do a scene, and there's slips in a hat, and one of the slips has a star on it. And everyone has to hide their slips. And the person who has the star, their job is to, at some point, forget a line, or jump ahead, or do something that takes the scene off track in terms of what are the flow of the lines. And if you practice that, okay, what do we do? What would we do in this situation if this scene goes off track? How would you jump in? So that if they practice that a couple times, when it actually happens during a show, they're prepared. They're prepared to jump in there. And it's also a good way to help them with the memorization of lines, the memorization of the scene. Couple other things. You can get students into getting them to write in their own words, not changing the lines of dialogue, but what's happening in this scene. What does my character want in the scene, and how am I doing it? So that if they get to a point where they forget a line, if they know their character and they know what they're supposed to do, they can sort of find their way to the right line because they know what the action is supposed to be. They know the direction of the scene. I think that it's really important that in every scene, everybody who's in it, whether they have a lot of lines or they don't, knows the direction of the scene and the direction of their character. An actor or a character who doesn't say anything in a scene still can have a direction and still can have a purpose and a point. And they can be there when somebody maybe in the middle of a scene starts to go awry. So what are your tips? What are your tips for line memorization? Is it repeat, repeat, repeat? Learn the lines without acting the lines, just so you're just totally learning them without having any association with them? Or are you a repeat, 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 but in character, so that you are connecting your character to your lines, so that if you forget your lines, because you are connecting it to your character and what your character has to do, then you are then you can find your way back to the line. What kind of learner are you? Are you a visual learner? Do you need to see the line, see the cue line, and that helps you to remember your line? Do you write out your lines? Do you listen? Maybe you need to record the cue line and listen to it. Do you get into pairs and just do line drill after line drill? Do you connect a line to an action? Do you get your students to get out of context so that you're pulling lines from the beginning of the play, the end of the play, the middle of the play, and everybody has to know what's coming next? Are you getting your cast to work together as a community so that when things go awry, as they always do when it comes to learning lines and getting that memorization happening on stage, how is everybody sort of pulling together to get the play back on track and keep the play moving forward? I just wanted to mention those plays again, just because I was talking about plays with lots and lots of lines for actors. These are a bunch of plays that have monologues. They're very monologue driven, monologue heavy. Mythologues by Janice Harris, which is all about your favorite Greek characters telling their stories through monologue. Stressed by Alan Hanel, which is a teen symphony. I love this description of this play. It is a teen symphony where not only is everyone telling their story, but all the stories then start to weave together. Oh, my goodness, you need so much memorization with a play like Stressed. And then Krista Barnard has two lovely monologue plays dramas called Puzzle Pieces and Have You Heard? All of these plays can be found on theaterfolk.com, because this is what we are. We are Theater Folk. I am Lindsay Price, resident playwright for Theater Folk. Thank you for having my face in your feed, and have an amazing fall afternoon.